Hello and welcome to Post Sports Live. I'm Gene Wang. Joining me this morning to discuss the sports stories that matter most to you is our three-member panel from the Washington Post sports staff. In the first chair, Neil Fancy Stats Greenberg. In the middle seat, Chelsea James, part of our 1-2 punch on the Washington Nationals beat. And to my left, from the DC Sports Blog, Scott Allen. What are we talking about today? Well, we're going to start you off with some baseball. Even though it's freezing here, spring training is right around the corner. We will discuss the Nationals, and as well as other teams that may pose challenges to the Nationals this season. Then we'll come back to the Washington Wizards and look at the Washington Redskins, even though it is their offseason, but you know they're a very active team in the offseason. And then we'll wrap up the program talking some local college hoops. But first off the top, the Nationals pitchers and catchers report next week. Full workout start February 25th, I believe, Chelsea. Is that right? Right around there, 24th, 25th, right? The Nationals obviously made a huge splash in the offseason by signing Max Scherzer to an already sturdy rotation, but they also did deal fan favorite and middle reliever, all-star middle reliever, Tyler Clippard. So, Chelsea, with that in mind, I'll come to you on this first. With spring training approaching fast, what are the Nationals' main issues in their starting rotation, and what do they look at in terms of the whole pitching staff as well as spring training gets underway?
I mean, I think the only issue in terms of the starting rotation is who starts on opening day,
right.
and then like if they can stay healthy and stuff. But if there were ever a starting rotation without any visible issues, this would be it. And I think in terms of the bullpen, that might be where on the pitching staff you see a few weak spots. But they did shore things up with Casey Janssen. I mean, people are going to worry about losing Tyler Clippard, obviously, and they lost a lot of innings from the staff they had last year. But Storen's closed before, and there are a lot of familiar faces there, like having one more year of experience. And so I think it's just going to be kind of a question of who falls where in that 7th, 8th inning role. But I think they feel pretty good about the arms they have there.
Neil, you wrote a blog post about Scherzer and Shields. We'll get to that a little bit later. But in terms of the Nats rotation, they should be probably more confident in their team going into the season, I'm assuming.
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, this is arguably the best rotation in baseball right now. And when you look at how the Atlanta Braves built their championship caliber teams, it was always through the pitching because there's no losing streaks. I mean, when you look at that, you have these top quality pitchers able to go every day, and you limit losing streaks, you win actual series between the clubs. That's going to be the key for them. So, yeah, the bullpen is probably a little bit light in terms on skill and talent, but ultimately you have guys at the front end of the rotation that can go fairly deep. They should be fine.
Well, Scott, does bullpen at all concern you, given, obviously we know how they are on the top end. I mean, they're great, but when they get to the middle and the end, is that a little bit concerning for you at all?
Yeah, and to echo what Chelsea and Neil said, I mean, bringing in Casey Janssen, kind of the under-the-radar signing after Scherzer and Escobar in the offseason. But, I mean, he's got a track record of closing in Toronto. He had a really good first half last year and then struggled after getting food poisoning on a trip to the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
So you hope he bounces back. I mean, the Nationals under Mike Rizzo, that he's shown an ability to have guys leave in the offseason and replace them with guys who fit right in, with the exception of maybe Rafael Soriano. But I think, the biggest question for me in the bullpen is how Drew Storen runs with that closer role, because it looks like he's going to be given the shot again. He struggled in the postseason, but great in the regular season. So if he struggles, the question then becomes how soon do they go to Janssen in that spot?
Well, Chelsea, it's been a few years since I've been in that clubhouse, so I wanted to ask you about would any of the starters who could be number one, would Jordan Zimmerman could be number one on most teams, Strasburg obviously, and Scherzer, would anyone feel slighted if another pitcher got the ball on opening day? I mean, what is your take on that?
I think that at this point I'm sure they'd feel slighted, but I don't think that would have any effect on, chemistry or anything like that. I mean, I think the kind of general wisdom would be you go with Strasburg because he's been the pillar and he's been the franchise guy, but then obviously you're giving Scherzer all this money. But to me, that's a one-day question. That's like a little bit of hype and then it's over, and maybe it comes back to you in the playoffs, but I still think your big three are pretty well established. So, I mean, I don't think that's going to be an issue at all for them. And I also don't think it's an issue, if someone goes down, you have Tanner Roark to step in.
Sure.
So there's very little controversy surrounding that group from what I can tell, I guess.
Well, Neil, we talked about this a little bit before about should it be Strasburg or should it be Scherzer. Do the numbers suggest one or the other?
They're pretty even. I still feel that Strasburg's the ace of this staff. I think that he's been here. He deserves opening day start. But, again, with the amount of money that they committed to Scherzer, it would not surprise me to see them give him the nod. But, talk about a good problem to have. I mean, we're talking about which potential Cy Young candidate is going to start opening day. I mean, and I agree with Chelsea. That's a one-day story at best.
There's no chemistry issue there as far as you can see, Scott, in terms of
I don't think it matters. I think it's a non-story. I mean, you let one start opening day, and then maybe the other one gets to start game one of the NLDS.
But if it comes back to the playoffs, who's going to be your one first? I mean, you assume this team's going to be
there,
right?
We'll talk about it on this show and in the clubhouse. I think, if they can put the egos aside, it'll be a non-issue.
Well, I know we just talked about playoffs, even though spring training hasn't started yet, but that leads us to our next topic involving the Nationals and the rest of baseball. Chelsea, I'll ask you this too to start. The Padres signed James Shields. Obviously, that's a pretty big signing. Their roster is really overhauled. They got Matt Kemp, they got Justin Upton, they added Derek Norris. Is that a team that's going to pose some problems to the Nationals, or is there some other team that they should be looking out for?
I mean, I think the Padres first have to worry about getting out of their own division.
Which is tough.
It's a brutal division,
and
the Dodgers didn't necessarily get worse. I mean, they still have probably the second best rotation if you're going to give it
definitely
the first.
Definitely 1-2, though you could argue maybe the best in terms of 1-2.
Right, they could be better than the Nationals even. And that said, I mean, the Padres obviously have overhauled in a way that we haven't seen, both in organizational mindset and just the amount of talent they brought in.
Sure.
And they've got a pretty loaded lineup. It's a little right-handed heavy, but if you're going to go against Clayton Kershaw and Madison Bumgarner, maybe that's how you do it. But I mean, they're definitely a team to worry about, but they're a little unproven. And as the Nats can tell you, it takes a few tries to kind of get down that playoff stretch run and get down the playoff experience. So I don't know that they're necessarily the biggest threat coming even out of the West.
Are the Nats a clear favorite to you, Neil, or is there someone else that?
I mean, it's between them and the Dodgers. But even if you consider the Nationals a 90-win team, the Padres would have to add 13 wins from last year's total just to get to where the Nats are, and that's difficult. Even with the signings, I mean, Shields is a great signing, but there's a reason why he lasted as long as he did in free agency. He's not the guy that's going to. He's not a 10-win difference guy. Maybe he adds 1 or 2 wins. So no, I don't think the Padres are going to cause any problems. I think you look at the Dodgers first, perhaps the Cardinals second, and then after that, who knows? But the Nationals are in very good position in terms of the National League. I don't think they'll have a problem coming out of the National League.
Well, I also wanted to ask you about the Shields and Scherzer comparison. You wrote a little about that. Just tell us what the numbers bore out there in terms of who got the better value.
Oh, surprisingly, I mean, the value for Scherzer, even after you look at all the how much more money he gets, is a better value once you discount the money to today's dollars, because a lot of that money is deferred.
Yeah.
But the Padres are getting what they paid for. They paid for a very reliable starter. They're paying him decent value. But Scherzer actually provides more value over those first 4 years than Shields does by quite a large margin, and which is surprising because typically when a team pays the big free agent, there's like a loser's curse, right? They have to pay the most money, so they don't always get the best value. But it really does look like, based on some projections and even taking into account the aging curves, that the Nats made a really nice signing with Scherzer.
Well, Scott, is there anyone the Nats should be looking out for? Is it San Diego, maybe the Dodgers, San Francisco, St. Louis, someone else?
I think it's a little bit too early to anoint the Padres a legitimate contender.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned some of the signings. And the roster construction right now, I mean, they've got as many potentially starting outfielders as the Nationals do starting pitchers.
That's a good point,
So, I mean, A.J. Preller, the GM there, potential to still make some moves and bring in some extra pieces. But as Chelsea said, I mean, I think the Dodgers, you take those top 2 pitchers in Greinke and Kershaw, and then Yasiel Puig, that lineup, that's still just the more intimidating team in the NL West.
Losing Matt Kemp, though, I mean, how is that going to factor in? I mean, that's a big bat there that you're losing.
Yeah, the Dodgers are really high on Jock Peterson sliding into that outfield. The Dodgers had the same problem that the Padres did kind of last year, with too many outfielders finding playing time for them. So that's out of the way. I still think they're the biggest threat.
All right, well, Scott, let me stick with you as we move on to our next topic, the Washington Wizards, who are going into the All-Star break. They've kind of come out of that slump, have won 2 games convincingly. John Wall's, of course, going to be the point guard in the All-Star game for the Eastern Conference. So, Scott, I'll ask you, what do you want to see from him, and what do you expect to see from him? And it doesn't even matter the performance, his performance in the All-Star game.
I don't think it matters. The only thing that matters is that he stays healthy.
Right.
John Wall, Chris Miller from Comcast spoke last night during the game about how John Wall's goal for the All-Star game is to break Magic Johnson's record for assists, which is 22, an absurd number set back in 1984. Wall had 22.
Goal's really high, though, right?
Wall had 22 in the Rookie-Sophomore Challenge, so possible if he plays 35 minutes he could do it, but he's going to be so busy already with the shooting contest with Steph Curry.
That's going to be fun to watch.
The skills challenge. So I want him to kind of emphasize the break part of this, and I hope that he does not approach anything near that 22 assists that Magic had.
Well, yeah, does Chelsea, does the All-Star game performance of John Wall matter? Obviously, we know in baseball it matters because you have home field advantage stake, but is it going to matter in this instance?
I mean, I couldn't agree more that the only thing that matters is he doesn't break anything, that he stays completely healthy. I mean, and yeah, the only way that it matters, he's kind of sort of rocketed into that like superstar echelon, maybe
Right.
in a way that he had it in the past. And so for that reason, maybe he'll feel like he has a little bit to prove, and the fans would like to see that, surrounded with guys who really have nothing to prove in Melo and LeBron. But other than that, I mean, I don't think Wizards fans care if he gets 22 assists, like you said, as long as he stays healthy and doesn't do anything crazy. I think everyone will be pretty happy with that.
Do anything crazy? He challenged Curry to a shooting contest. I mean,
This is the national stage. It's New York City. I mean, it's bright lights. Would John Wall serve himself well to perform at a very, very high level, or does it even make a difference?
no, because it's silly. It's a lose-lose, right? I mean, if he breaks Magic's record, it means nothing, right? And he's probably played too long. If he loses to Steph Curry, it was an ill-advised wager to begin with. I mean, what's the upside here? We know John Wall is good. He was elected to the All-Star game. I mean, that enough is to solidify his season. You don't need to add all this other undue nonsense like I got to break Magic's record or I got to beat Steph Curry in a shooting contest. I mean, who cares? Just go out there, acknowledge the crowd, play whatever you play, come home, and try to right the ship with the team because this Wizards team is okay. And it's not, we talked about this before. They're a good Eastern Conference team that's not a title contender. Focus on that. Don't focus on
Well, not
how
an
many
NBA
assists
Finals
you
contender,
have.
maybe an Eastern
Yeah.
Conference, maybe not with the way Atlanta's playing. But speaking of that, Scott, so are these must-win games going into the All-Star break? Do you look at it that way, or what do the Wizards need to do going into the break to kind of make you feel comfortable for them coming out of it?
I mean, I think last night was a big step, beating a bad Orlando team.
Yeah.
It's to keep
Without
beating-
Bradley Beal too.
Right. Garrett Temple sliding in there. I think the important thing is just kind of stay the course. I mean, John Wall played really well last night. In fairness to him, I mean, this is his exhibition. He's played really well throughout this first half. And yeah, the issue after the All-Star break will be to see if they can beat some of the upper echelon teams. They've had some success with Chicago, but Toronto has their number. Regardless of what they do in the next few games, I'm confident going into the All-Star game that they can correct things.
Okay, well, now we're moving on to a team that is off-season, but if there's any team in the NFL that makes more news in the offseason than the Washington Redskins, I don't know who it is. We'll start with Robert Griffin III. In case you've missed it, he got on an Instagram fight with one of his followers, I guess, about whether he's handling himself the right way in the offseason. We've heard this before. It's not the first time Robert Griffin III has gone on social media to kind of butt heads with some of his detractors. Scott, you wrote about this. I got to start with you. Who cares? Is it a big deal because it's RG3 and it's in Washington, D.C., or does it really say something about him in terms of his preparation and if he cares enough about the playbook that he should be arguing back and forth with one of his followers?
Right. I'll back off from calling it a fight. It was a civil debate, I will say, in the comments of an Instagram post.
That Kobe thing where the guy wanted to fight the guy in Los Angeles, Temecula, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. But, I mean, the issue here is that Robert Griffin III is correct that him posting 2 or 3 times a day to social media does not preclude him from putting in the work that's necessary for him to improve on the football field. Yep. He is wrong in choosing the comments of an Instagram post of him singing Michael Jackson in the car on the way to the workout as the place to explain that to people.
He spelled Billy incorrect in Billie Jean. I think he used a Y instead of an
I-E.
Cut him then. Yeah, that's right.
That's the
grounds
worst
for
offense.
You can't. Yeah, it's Michael Jackson.
I think my editor saved me from that one. I probably did the same thing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he's not wrong that he should feel free to post on Instagram every day. It becomes a story when he goes back and forth with this guy. There are people out there, and I know from reading the comments of my own posts, who believe that posting a song about him singing Michael Jackson means that those are 10 seconds that he's not putting in work in the gym, which is just ridiculous. So the next step for RG3 is to post a video of himself working out and singing Michael Jackson at the same time, and then just ignore the comments.
Well, Chelsea, is this a story at all? If someone if Strasburg were all of a sudden posting, or we know Bryce Harper's done it too before. I mean, is this a story to you?
I think the argument that he's not, using that time in the weight room, using that time in the playbook is absolutely ridiculous because the people who are, commenting are presumably at work too and doing the same thing. So I think that's a double standard that's kind of hard to ignore. But again, if Bryce Harper goes back and forth with someone, if any of these guys do, then it becomes a story, because while there is no real defense mechanism for them on social media, going back and forth is never a battle they can win, and it just looks bad. And so I think that's why it is a story. It's like, that's probably ill-advised, as was the fact that he was Instagramming while driving.
Yeah, that could be the news story.
But
I mean, isn't that not allowed? I don't know.
I think it's illegal.
Yeah, I believe it is.
So I think that's the only time that it becomes a story, is when these athletes kind of depart from that insulated world they're in and start trying to engage with people that don't have the same accountability that they do.
Yeah. Is this a non-starter, Neil, for you? Does it even make a difference?
Yeah,
Should we even care about it?
No, you don't care. I mean, here's the thing. You have no idea how much work he's putting in. You don't know, like, where's the pie chart that says he's, working out this much and he's Instagramming this much? I mean, you don't know, and it's silly. It's the off season. The only reason why it's a story is because he stinks, and fans are upset that he stinks. They're upset at how much the team invested in him. They're upset of how injury prone he is, how poor he is in the pocket, and all these other things on the field, and they're carrying it over to social media, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, well, we'll stick with the Redskins and the theme of high levels of badness. Their coaching staff's been put together. Defensive, you know how bad their defense was. Joe Barry's the defensive coordinator. They've added some other pieces. Bill Callahan, not bad. I mean, you saw what he did with the Cowboys offensive line, but what would you assign a grade to the coaching staff now that's finally complete?
The defensive side?
No, just the staff in general.
I don't know, maybe like a C+, B- maybe. I mean, the Joe Barry signing I'm not a big fan of, because that Lions team got instantly better once he was gone. I mean, so he made a bad team worse. You can argue that he had bad players, and I'm not disagreeing, but as soon as he left, that defense improved dramatically. So not a big fan of that. There's not a lot of experience, and I think the experience that is on that coaching staff is probably not in the right places, because it's the places that weren't really broken to begin with. I mean, so who knows what the quarterbacks coach is going to do? Who knows how much impact a defensive, inside linebackers coach is going to have, and all that other stuff. I mean, it doesn't really matter. This team is going to live and die by how well Robert Griffin III does, because he's the catalyst to this offense. He's what they put all their eggs in the basket for. And if Jay Gruden, the quarterback whisperer, can't get this offense off the ground, then the defensive side no one's going to pay any attention to. It's going to be the focus of RG3 until this team starts winning.
Well, Chelsea, what mark are you giving the Redskins coaching staff? Obviously, the biggest hire is Joe Barry for the defense, but there's some other small pieces. But how are you looking at that?
I mean, I kind of tend to be in the same range, the C+ range. I mean, it's definitely nothing exciting, and I think the Barry hire is one that has a lot of fans very confused, what are we doing? Because, as you said, he had the worst defense in the league in a couple of statistical categories with the Lions in his 2 seasons as coordinator there. And I mean, the argument that he had bad players there doesn't really help him here, because he doesn't have the greatest, most talented defense
here
either.
A lot different, yeah.
And I've seen comments from Gruden that he was running a 4-3 then, I think, and maybe he'll switch that here. Should that change everything? I don't know.
That's a whole other
right, that's a whole other issue. I mean, I think Callahan definitely is going to help out the offensive line, but again, you need talent there. So to me, it's almost doesn't matter, because the player personnel is such a bigger problem for them.
Well, Scott, Jay Gruden said that one of the reasons he wanted Barry is because he was so passionate in the interviews. Does that make a difference to you? And as far as the letter grade, what would you assign to that coaching staff?
Well, for the letter grade, we got some grade inflation going on over here. I'd say maybe C-, and maybe it's just because it's on the heels of Scott McCloughan, who was kind of universally regarded as an A+ hire for the Redskins.
That kind of tips the grading scale, right?
To be able to bring him in, but yeah, I've transcribed a few Joe Barry interviews, and he is a fiery guy. He's very fired up, and he's jacked up, I think is what he said.
He is also.
But if you believe that. He talked about his time in Detroit, because that's a question that comes up. We talked about it. Yeah. That you don't learn during the rosy times. You learn by going through the tough times. Well, then he, despite having only 2 years as defensive coordinator, is the wisest man in Redskins Park, going 0-16. So the fieriness, that's great. You both touched on it. The personnel. I mean, if he can turn that fiery nature into getting his guys to play better, that'll be great. I'm a little skeptical, though. Jason Reed wrote the column about the lack of experience in the key coordinator spots, and I'm worried about that.
Okay. Well, we will have plenty of offseason to discuss the Redskins. Now let's move to some college basketball, which is really heating up. March Madness is not that far off, believe it or not. Our local teams, Maryland has lost 2 of 3. Georgetown has lost 3 of 4. Virginia has lost its best player, Justin Anderson, for 4 to 6 weeks because of an injury. Scott, I'll go back to you again. Which one of these teams do you think is in the most trouble in the immediate future?
For me, it's Maryland,
Yeah.
and I don't think, obviously Virginia's going to make the tournament as a
Yeah.
one seed. All three of these teams are going to make the tournament. But the thing about Maryland, they don't have any really bad losses in terms of the opponents, but their last 3 road games, they've just been obliterated against some pretty good teams, Indiana, Ohio State, and Iowa, but just the way that they've looking lost offensively. And it's a bad sign to me that a team that relies so much on freshmen, namely Melo Trimble, seems to be regressing. I mean, even their last 2 wins at home against bottom feeders, Northwestern and Penn State, were barely beating those teams. So, I mean, that's just kind of weird. They have big wins early in the season against Oklahoma State and Iowa State. Those look great. But they've got to get things together on the road. They get Indiana at home this week and then at Penn State, I think.
Yeah. Well, they're circling February 24th, Wisconsin, which they get at home. But, I mean, we have this long way to go before then. There's a lot of teams bunched up at 7-4, including Indiana, and that's going to be a huge game tomorrow.
But for me, I'm worried about the regression, apparently, from the freshmen in particular.
Well, Chelsea, which one of those 3 teams do you think has the most to worry about in the immediate future?
I mean, I completely agree. I think Maryland is a little bit scary right now. I mean, if only because they are a very young team and they didn't really have to learn how to get it together because they started out with it together, you know.
Yeah.
So there was never anything where they had to kind of reel it back in. And I think the other really disturbing thing about the way they've played, especially in those 3 road games, is just the defense. I mean, teams are just putting up tons of points, and Iowa shot the lights out. I mean, that happens, but it's Iowa. Maybe there were some things you could have done to change that. So I think that's the scary thing, and Melo is carrying a lot of the load. He is just a freshman, has shown himself to be capable of doing it, but clearly, you know, they need some people around him to start doing things differently, particularly in the post. I mean, they haven't really put much up in the paint lately at all. So there's just kind of a lot of holes and question marks there, and they've gotten worse and never had to get better.
They got to hope that Des Wells is on his way to full health and will be fully healthy so Melo can have someone else to kind of lean on if he needs it. But are you going to make it unanimous, Neil, that Maryland's the team that's most in trouble here?
No, I think it's Georgetown. I mean, they have the loss to Providence, Villanova, but even more importantly, we know that it's much easier to stay on a AP poll or even in the RPI than it is to fall off. And right now they're out. So they're going to have to really start to impress people going forward, whereas Maryland just really has to hang on at this point. So I think Georgetown is probably in a little bit worse position in that they're on the outside looking in terms of the AP poll and just have to really show themselves as being worthy to get back onto that national spotlight.
Yeah, and
so
the other problem with Georgetown, who plays tonight, by the way, in Newark, then they have a week off, is that besides for Butler, they don't play any other teams that are high RPI teams the rest of the way, so they're not going to have a lot of room to move back up if should they lose, right? But let me ask you about the Justin Anderson injury. Is that how much of a factor you think that might be, Scott, in terms of Virginia's future, immediate future?
Yeah, I mean, they're losing one of the best players in the nation this year. He's been great for them on both sides. Obviously, they're a defensive team, and Tony Bennett, I think, has shown an ability to adjust kind of 2 losing guys last year, the senior leader and Joe Harris. I think the timing is not great, but he could come back, given that Virginia's set for, it looks like, a number 1 seed. He could be back for the tournament. Then it's just about how quickly he can get back in game shape.
Well, I love the NCAA tournament. I love March Madness, one of my favorite times of the year. But our time is done. We'll have plenty of time to discuss that, too. Chelsea, have a good time in Florida. Make sure you come back, get a lot of sun, okay? But bring the sunscreen. We don't want you to get sunburned
and don't
down
text
there.
while driving.
Yeah, there you go. Do not do that at all. For Neil Greenberg, Chelsea Janes, and Scott Allen, I'm Gene Wang. Remember to follow us on Twitter @PostSportsLive. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.